But one thing that I think we always want to remember, and that, you know, is a lesson that I'm thinking about a lot, is that even after a big accomplishment like this, we still have a lot of work to do. And a lot of times we don't realize how continuous the work process is. You know, right now we're in the middle of election season. We have two national conventions, and we've got politicians who are selling themselves to us, as they always have, and that's what they need to do to get elected. They're telling us that they will make things happen. They're raising our expectations, and that's part of the marketing that they have to do. They, you know, we've been around, many of us have been around, and we've seen a variety of reform efforts that have taken place over the years. There's been welfare reform, tax reform, healthcare reform. I've actually seen 2 tax reforms happen in my life. And whenever these reforms pass, we kind of think, and whenever these big things happen, we kind of think, oh, good, you know, it's over. We finally accomplished something. We're going to move forward. Everything's going to be better. But in reality, what happens is the very next day, another level of work starts. You know, we find that there's still work that has to be done. There's still battles that have to be fought. A few years ago, we passed the Amendment 4, giving returning citizens the right to vote in Florida, and we're still fighting to make sure that they get those rights. So the work really never ends. So as we celebrate this milestone today that we're all very proud of, we all also have to be proud and honored that we know each other, and we know all of these people who are on this call have been working for many years for a more perfect union. And I know that we're going to all continue to do that work, and I'm really honored to be part of that work with all of you. Speaking of people that I'm honored to know, I'm going to introduce Emily Lisska. She is the former director of the Jacksonville Historical Society, and she's the current president of the, of the Florida Historical Society. And she's going to be taking us through the, and she's a native of Jacksonville. She's going to take us through the past suffrage movement, especially as it relates to Jacksonville and Florida. And then after that, we're going to be hearing from Patricia Sams, who's the Diversity Program Manager of JEA, and she's going to talk about the road ahead. And then finally, Linnell will come on and wrap up the program. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Emily.
Well, hello, everybody. I'm Emily Rutherford Lisska, and with any luck, you won't even have to see me. I'm going to go very, very fast because I have certainly prepared for over my allotted time. So in the next 10 to 14 minutes, they're all grimacing, I'm going to offer an overview of some, certainly not all, of Jacksonville's women who stepped up to serve as important leaders in both the state and national level to achieve passage of the 19th Amendment. You know, it's difficult to imagine, we'll go to the next image, please. It's difficult to imagine the challenges of traveling to the first Women's Rights Convention in Seneca Falls, New York, especially from Jacksonville and then back again. Suffice it to say, the trip would have likely involved stagecoaches, steamships, canal conveyance, rough rail travel, a trip weeks or months in the making. In truth, most of the attendees live nearby. Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton were among the organizers, and in this image, they flanked the one and only Susan B. Anthony, who was not in attendance. After passionate speeches by Cady Stanton and African-American abolitionist Frederick Douglass, a woman's suffrage resolution finally passed by a slim majority. We'll go to the next image. Jacksonville's population, when the Seneca Falls Convention convened, was less than 1,000 people, and all of Florida's settlers would not have filled today's present football stadium. I never thought the word football would be in this suffrage presentation. Only a state for 3 years, Florida was a howling wilderness, and the situation did not improve much by 1850 or by 1860 at the dawn of the Civil War, when limited train travel and so-called instant messaging of the day, the telegraph, finally reached Jacksonville, 2 full decades behind northern cities. Then the war largely stopped nationwide suffrage activities. When the war ended, and we'll go to the next image, when the war ended, the great social reformer Harriet Beecher Stowe headed to Jacksonville. The Seneca Falls Convention was now 20 years in the past, and travel to Florida, while improved, was still a dreadful ordeal. A late 1860s line seen in the literature underscores the story of a still very remote Florida. You can get to Jacksonville by train. You can get to Jacksonville by boat, and whichever way you choose, you'll wish you'd chosen the other one. We'll go to an image, please. Stowe arrived at the St. James Hotel in 1867 on the identical footprint of today's City Hall. The town was in a building frenzy following the war's devastation, and during the next 2 decades, Jacksonville transformed into a winter destination for Northerners. Stowe had other purposes. She was here to check on her son and her investment in an experimental cotton plantation, and to do something for the freed slaves. Although the cotton plantation ended a failure, we'll go to the next image now, thank you. Although the cotton plantation ended in a failure, during the trip, Stowe was rowed across the St. Johns to pick up her mail in Mandarin. She fell in love with the river, the orange groves, and the quirky cottage. That encounter brought the nation's greatest social reformer, author of the acclaimed Uncle Tom's Cabin, to the area for the next 16 years, also escaping, of course, the freezing winters of her Connecticut home. We'll go to the next image, please. As all of you know, human rights were at the heart of both the slavery and the suffrage issues. Stowe had already championed the first. The suffrage movement was not a simple matter for this world's most recognized reformer. Beginning in 1868, Stowe, sitting at her quirky Mandarin home, was courted by Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony to lead their movement. Stowe was sympathetic, but by 1869, she made it clear to the suffragists she would not support their cause. Next image, please. Decades passed, and then in 1897, a remarkable local organization was formed, the Women's Club of Jacksonville. Catherine Egan was among the founders, as was Anna Louise Payne, wife of the anti-women's suffrage politician Duncan Fletcher, and a future Jacksonville mayor and U.S. senator. The club embraced school issues, prison reform, children and women's health, World War I priorities, and dozens of causes. The women did not always agree, but they worked together on important problems facing Jacksonville and were publicly recognized as the city's conscience. Next slide, please. Finally, on June 15th, 1912, a group of 32 Jacksonville women dedicated specifically to the suffrage cause organized the Florida Equal Franchise League. At their second meeting, Catherine Livingston Egan, a Women's Club founder, offered remarks that received statewide attention. She said, in women's suffrage, one of the most quoted and most absurd figures of speech is, a woman's place is in her home. And I am sorry to say that many women quote this as glibly as the men. She spoke of women who should be free to look on life with their own eyes and think their own thoughts. Mrs. Egan was elected their president. She garnered a headline in the Tampa Times, Jacksonville suffragists to show the way. When she wrote her memories of the movement, Egan said she was inspired to help while attending the first International Women's Suffrage Conference in 1902. There she met 82-year-old Susan B. Anthony, who told Egan, Florida is the only state in the Union that has never done anything for the cause of women's suffrage. Egan said Mrs. Anthony's words remained with her long after Anthony's death 4 years later. Next image, please. When Egan left the city, Jacksonville native Florence Murphy Cooley stepped up as the League's president. During this time, the League's offices were located on the third floor of the city's dazzling new St. James building, part of the Cohen Brothers department store and today's City Hall. Jacksonville was now headquarters for the silent film industry, and without doubt, the Franchise League offices were, we could go to the next image, please, I'm sorry. So the Franchise League headquarters on the third floor of this dazzling new building, Cohen Brothers department store, were clearly located in the city's most prestigious and visible location. And we will, Florence Cooley, whose accomplishments were legend, and I'm sorry to say the first woman to lose. Next slide, please. Like Florence Cooley, Helen Hunt West was Florida-born, growing up in the Central Florida citrus belt. Part of a Quaker family, Helen was encouraged to seek a profession if she chose. She studied at Stetson, Florida State College for Women, and then found a long career at the Florida Times-Union in Jacksonville as a writer. Then she was editor of the Society page, very typical positions for female journalists at the time. Hunt also studied law and was the first woman admitted to the Florida bar. She continued with the Times Union while setting up her law practice, organizing 400 Jacksonville women for work during World War I, and independently editing newspapers that presented legal and public affairs for women, including suffrage. Inspired by hearing a speech given by Quaker lawyer and suffragist Alice Paul, Hunt soon accepted the top post of the Florida chapter of the National Woman's Party, considered the more radical suffrage group of the time. This is the group that would later spin off as the League of Women Voters. Hunt lobbied in Washington and in Tallahassee, finding men in government patronizing. One congressman told her women were too influenced by men to be allowed to vote. Another suggested she should go home and get married. In 1917, we'll have a new slide here. In 1917, Hunt's immediate duty for the Woman's Party: find Florida women to picket the White House. She found only one, an unlikely recruit, 73-year-old Jacksonville Springfield resident, Mary Nolan. Lame and frail, a Red Cross volunteer, and a Southerner, she was not the typical profile of a picketing suffragist. When Nolan arrived in Washington on November 10th, 1917, Alice Paul and 70 others had already been arrested and jailed. The charge: obstructing the sidewalk. Nolan, with 40 other women in groups of 5 or 6 at a time, stepped up to their White House post. Each group was arrested. Nolan, billed the nation's oldest suffragist, was in the last group, and the cheering of the bystanders increased, clearly attracted by her age. The picketers were arrested, then they were released. Many returned to their post, including Nolan. The women were given sentences ranging from 6 days to 6 months when arrested again. The aging Mrs. Nolan was sentenced to 6 days. When sentenced, she fearlessly interrupted the judge. "I have a nephew who's fighting in France. I should be proud to die in prison for the right of democracy for American women." New image, please. Nolan was sent to the Occoquan workhouse, and I left out, where filthy conditions and brutal treatment prevailed. By this time, some suffragists on hunger strikes were victims of gruesome forced feedings. We'll go to the next image, please. Well, I guess I've mixed the images up. That's okay, we'll stick with this. By the time some suffragists on hunger strikes were victims of gruesome forced feedings, the experience, as written soon after by Nolan, was named the Night of Terror. Nolan recalled one guard who said, "We'll put you through hell," and they did. Nolan's quick release and detailed statement to the Woman's Party attorneys triggered a new legal approach. Her testimony offered a grim view of the jail's inhumane conditions, and the courts agreed, ordering release of the suffragist. We're actually on the right slide now, I do believe. Oh, well, let's go into that one just so people can see it, please, even though I've already talked about this. Although President Wilson had announced support for women's suffrage, the group's goal: the president must convince Congress to pass the 19th Amendment. Nolan volunteered as part of the Fire Watch picketers, the slide you previously saw, burning the president's speeches on democracy to underscore the irony of the World War I fight for liberty as American women waited for their rights. All total, Mrs. Nolan was arrested 9 times, and 168 suffragists served prison terms for their White House protest. New image, please. I think we'll need to jump to. There you go, we're right place. The Woman's Party then focused on a new tactic to rally Americans to the cause, a 16-city train tour with the suffragette former prisoners. The train was nicknamed fittingly the Prison Special. We'll go to the next tour, please. Jacksonville was the second stop on the tour, March 7th, 1919, and Mrs. Nolan was a featured speaker. The suffragists dressed in prison uniforms, delighting the crowd gathered in then Hemming Park. And in the evening, a speech was presented by Mary Nolan, the hometown heroine. We'll go to the next image, please. Jacksonville's May Mann Jennings was considered the most powerful woman in the state and carried that role faithfully and tirelessly as the new president of the Florida Federation of Women's Clubs. Her civic service was legion, including her role as the Women's Club of Jacksonville Legislative Chair. In 1905, she relocated to the Springfield suburb of Jacksonville, following her husband, William S. Jennings' term as Florida governor. A tireless and inventive fighter, she was an expert at lobbying. She knew her way around Tallahassee and politics, not only from her years as First Lady, but she'd also worked in the legislative offices of her father. In 1915, women's suffrage was a priority adopted by the Florida Federation of the Women's Club and was led by Mrs. Jennings' efforts for the next 5 years. Thousands of Florida's women were represented in the critical suffrage advocacy years at both the state and federal level. We'll go to the next image here. And this is Florida Capitol, so my words will belie that. Then on May 21st, 1919, the U.S. House passed the Women's Suffrage Amendment, the 19th Amendment. By June 4th, it squeaked by the U.S. Senate, with both Florida senators voting in opposition, including Jacksonville's Duncan Fletcher. The Florida legislature, now we're in the right place, still in session for 3 more days, had an exceptional opportunity as the first state to ratify the amendment. Mrs. Jennings emphasized the legislature's history-making position. The lawmakers ignored the matter and adjourned. Jennings later implored Governor Katz to call a special session to ratify. Helen Hunt confirmed the votes were in place. The governor refused. By late summer, August 18th, 1920, Tennessee became the 36th state to ratify the amendment, giving it the necessary 3/4 ratification. And you all know this story. It passed by 1 vote cast by a young legislator after being admonished by his mother to be a good boy and do so. The results were certified on August 26, 1920, 100 years ago today. We'll go to the next image, please. Jacksonville began registering women to vote September 7th, 1920. Helen Hunt was the first woman to register. 5 weeks later, 8,702 white women and 7,309 Black women were registered. Another insight to Jacksonville in the 1920s. Statistics were often reported by race. Eartha White, one of the great social change agents in the city's history, championed the successful African-American registration. It was reported the registration went off without a hitch in Duval County. Well, almost. There were obstacles. Women who didn't want to declare a party affiliation, they worked that out, and women who refused to reveal their age. Both were handled with ease, especially when the later solution for the age issue permitted women to use the words 21 plus. We'll go to the last image now, please. At long last, all women in the nation could vote in all elections, but the story to get there was not pretty. 72 years in the making, a hard-fought battle, and the Florida story holds a much uglier side. The state's lawmakers tried to make backroom deals to prohibit African-American women from voting. The Florida legislature symbolically ratified the 19th Amendment in 1969, just in time for the amendment's 50th birthday. Both Mamie Jennings and Helen Hunt died earlier in the 60s, not witnessing this gesture by lawmakers. In fact, none of the women I've discussed tonight were living in 1969, except the incomparable Eartha White. So tonight, we pause in tribute to all women who stepped up, and especially our city's women. Job well done. Happy 100.
Thank you so much, Emily. I feel very lucky that I had the opportunity to work with Emily as we developed this presentation, and I feel terrible because I learned a lot from her during our development of this PowerPoint, and I wish that she had had a lot more time to tell you the many things that she knows and that I got to know. Our next speaker I haven't had the chance to work with yet, but hopefully I will someday soon. Patricia Sams has been the manager of the diversity program at JEA since 2011. She currently serves on the First Coast Diversity Council, and she serves on several other nonprofit boards. When I took a look at her LinkedIn profile, I was really impressed and very humbled by the number of boards that she's been involved with over the years. So we are now going to turn the presentation over to her. And I think we're starting with a video. Is that correct?
Very good.
Good morning. My name is Pat Gillum-Sams, and it is my pleasure to be with you this morning as a part of this important event. Well, children, where there is so much racket, there must be something out of kilter. I think that twixt the Negroes of the South and the women in the North, all talking about rights, the white man will be in a fix pretty soon. But what's all this here talking about? The man over there says that women need to be helped into carriages and lifted over ditches and to have the best place everywhere. Well, nobody ever helps me into carriages or over mud puddles or gives me any best place. And ain't I a woman? Look at me. Look at my arm. I have plowed and planted and gathered into barns, and no man could head me. Ain't I a woman? I could work as much and eat as much as any man when I could get it, and bear the lash as well. And ain't I a woman? I have borne 13 children and seen most of them all sold off to slavery. And when I cried out with a mother's grief, none but Jesus heard me. Ain't I a woman? Then they talk about this thing in the head. What is it called? Yeah, that's right, honey. Intellect. Well, what's that got to do with a woman's rights or Negro's rights? If my cup holds a pint and yours holds a quart, wouldn't you be mean not to let me have my little half measure full? Then that little man in the back there, he says, women can't have as much rights as men because Christ wasn't a woman. Where did your Christ come from? Where did your Christ come from? From God and a woman. Man ain't had nothing to do with it. And if the first woman God ever made was strong enough to turn the world upside down all alone, these women all together ought to be able to turn it back and get it right side up again. And now they is asking to do just that. The men better let them. I'm obliged to you for hearing me, and now old Sojourner ain't got nothing else to say.
Good evening. My name is Pat Gillum-Sams, not Sojourner Truth, but she was truly a trailblazer. Black abolitionist and former slave, born in 1797, Isabella Bromfree, who later changed her name after gaining her freedom in 1827 to Sojourner Truth, spoke to a group of feminists in Akron, Ohio at the Women's Rights Convention. This landmark speech is now recognized as one of the most famous abolitionist and women's rights speeches in American history. Sojourner Truth continued to speak out for the rights of African Americans and women during and after the Civil War until her death in 1883. She would become one of the most powerful advocates for human rights in the 19th century. After the Civil War, throughout the 19th century, Black women worked on two fronts simultaneously, reminding Black men and white women that they needed legal rights, equal rights, and the right to vote. It was clear that white women of the time, like Susan B. Anthony, had primarily a white agenda. Black women sought the ballot for themselves as well as their men to empower the Black communities besieged by racial terror after the emancipation of slaves. In 1910, women won the vote in dozens of states, and Black women became a powerful voting bloc in northern cities like Chicago. Although the 19th Amendment of 1920 expanded voting rights substantially, it did not end racial terrorism preventing African Americans from voting, specifically in southern states. As mentioned earlier, I speak the names of individuals like Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman, Ida B. Wells, Margaret Murray Washington, Mary Church Terrell, Nannie Helen Burroughs. These women and way too many others that go unnamed were discriminated against, abused, raped by Southerners and Northerners, and they did not see the passage or the right to vote. The strength that they showed was passed down from generation to generation of women like Fannie Lou Hamer, Ella Baker, Diane Nash, Mary McLeod Bethune, who contributed to the passage of the Voting Rights Act in 1965, which finally gave Black women her full rights to vote. The torch has since been passed down to modern day sheroes like Dorothy Height, Shirley Chisholm, Barbara Jordan, Angela Davis, Barbara Harris, and yes, Kamala Harris too. Val Demings, Stacey Abrams, and a mayor named Keisha from Atlanta, just to name a few. The year was 1980 when a young, impressionable, first-generation college student hailing from the urban core of Miami, just 9 blocks north of Liberty City, attended Florida State University, where she pledged a historically Black sorority on that majority white campus. And that college student was me. Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated was founded on the campus of Howard University in Washington, D.C. in January 1913. The first public act of that sorority on March 3rd, 1913, the day before Woodrow Wilson's inauguration, was to march down Pennsylvania Avenue in a parade that was formulated and put together by Alice Paul and Lucy Burns, who founded the Congressional Union for Women's Suffrage. This first of a kind women's suffrage event garnered 5,000 participants and attracted an estimated crowd of 500,000. Prior to the parade, the issue of Black participation in the march threatened to cause a rift with delegations from southern states. Therefore, some Black groups did not march with their state delegation. They were instead relegated to the back of the parade. The 22 collegiate students from Howard University, the Deltas, they were a part of those segregated groups that were in the back of the parade. So even in the midst of protesting for women's rights, discrimination and unequal rights was alive and well, much like today. Black Lives Matter. So like Sojourner, I really cannot separate my Blackness from my being a woman of prominence, of power, and of purpose. In this day, as we face a paramount election that I would submit to you is one of the most important in our lifetime, in my lifetime, with the nomination of a woman as vice president. It feels like it's a full circle moment for that little girl that grew up in the urban core of Miami. I am both proud, I'm humbled. I've been asked, is she in my sorority? No, she isn't, but she is a woman of power and of importance, not because of where she came from, but because she is here in this moment and qualified for the opportunity. So at the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, I feel that we are positioned full speed ahead to do some great things in this country and bring us all together for this moment of prominence, importance, and togetherness, so we can move this platform forward, not just for women, but for all of us. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Good evening. I'm Linnell Philman, the president of the League of Women Voters, Jacksonville First Coast. Let me start by thanking Ashish and his team and Deborah Miller, our technical advisor, for this evening's event, and our two presenters, Emily and Patricia, for reminding us of the work and the workers here in our community and our nation that put women in the Constitution. It's good to recall our shortcomings and our accomplishments in hopes that we do not repeat one while building on the other. The initial meeting in Seneca Falls centered on the rights of women regarding equality in education, marriage, divorce, property, and employment, and oddly enough, an amendment introduced by Alice Paul and Crystal Eastman in December 1923, almost 100 years ago, remains unratified still today. It is 2020, and we are still not able to get our majority male electors to pass the Equal Rights Amendment, an amendment designed to guarantee legal rights to all American citizens, regardless of sex, and to end the legal distinction between men and women in matters of divorce, property, employment, and other matters. That initial meeting in Seneca Falls also brought forth the sentiment of suffrage and the fight for all citizens to have equal access to the ballot box and the vote. And yet, here it is, 2020, with the Voting Rights Advancement Act sitting stagnant on an elected leader's desk. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 was designed to ensure that state and local governments do not deny American citizens the equal right to vote based on their race, color, or membership in a minority language group. This momentous piece of legislation enshrines the right of every citizen an equal opportunity to participate in our democracy. The League recently commemorated the 55th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act by asking our senators to support Senate Bill 4263, the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, protecting voters across the country from nefarious voter suppression tactics while providing key preclearance and legal remedies. In honor of those brave men and women who worked to secure the vote during abolition, suffrage, and the civil rights movement, I'm asking you to call your elected representatives to demand that they act on these necessary pieces of legislation for all Americans. Dial 202-224-3121 for the DC switchboard to be connected to your elected representatives. And as many of you know, the census continues in our nation, with many of our neighbors still uncounted. The results of the census informs how hundreds of billions of dollars in federal funding will be allocated to more than 100 programs, including Medicaid, Head Start, block grants for community health services, and Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, otherwise known as SNAP, but also funding for hospitals, fire departments, school lunch programs, and it informs business owners on their decisions, such as where to open new stores, restaurants, factories, or offices, where to expand operations, where to recruit employees, and which products and services to offer. And the census also determines how many elected representatives within a state, and also redistricting. And during this pandemic, the need for an accurate count could not be more important. I'm asking each person viewing our presentation to participate in the census this evening if you have not already done so. Dial 844-330-2020 or go to 2020census.gov. I'm asking you to commit to personally calling 10 people in the next 24 hours and ask if they have completed the census. Explain its importance if they have not. Provide them with the census number and ask them to commit to calling 10 people also. And ask them to call the representatives about the ERA and the VRA. Let's be a positive virus that spreads throughout our community and our state. As we look back to the work, the struggles, and the accomplishments of those from 100+ years ago, ask yourself, how will you be remembered by history 100 years from now? We can disagree on how suffragists and civil rights warriors marched, rallied, protested, gave speeches, gathered petitions, and disrupted society. But we must agree that doing something is far better than doing nothing. I ask that you join the League of Women Voters and other grassroots and established organizations to get our fellow citizens registered to vote. Help them seek out information so they can cast an informed vote, and help us influence and hold accountable our elected representatives to protect the vote, the voter, and our elections. The League continues to work alongside many of our partner organizations to create a more perfect democracy, and we hope that you will join us in that work. Please continue in your efforts to remain safe and healthy for yourselves, but also for our community as a whole. Happy Women's Equality Day, and thank you for joining us this evening.
Thanks, Linnell. I want to also thank Linnell for recognizing the team that put this program together. We're really glad. We've got some more work that the team's going to be doing. We probably have a couple of more celebratory events that we're going to try to do close to Election Day. So look out for that. Look at our website and see what we're doing. For those who are looking for information about upcoming elections, I need to go back. Vote 411 is a site that the League uses to let voters know a lot about upcoming elections. We have information about up candidates and constitutional amendments and a whole variety of other information that might be useful. So I'm going to take a look at the chat now to see if there's any. I haven't seen any questions come up, but if there are any questions, we've got a couple of more minutes. If you'd like, Linnell, do you have any other comments you want to make as we're waiting to see if anybody's got any questions?
No, I'm just excited that people chose to join us this evening. I know there's a lot going on, and there's also a convention that's about to be televised. So I appreciate people taking time out of their busy days to join us this evening.
Ashish, there were no questions, but Lark pointed out an interesting point that Mary Nolan was prominently featured in the Jacksonville Women's March in January 2017.
Yes, she was. Yes.
Thank you. Well, with that, since I see no other questions, I guess it's just time to wrap up. Thank you all for joining us tonight, and happy Women's Equality Day.